So, have you ever actually stopped to think about the words coming out of your mouth? I mean, we tend to think of the languages we speak as this static, rigid set of rules, right? Completely fixed in stone. But the truth is, language is a living, breathing, and constantly mutating ecosystem. It really is. The words we use today are literally the survivors of centuries of invisible evolution. So, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going on this absolutely fascinating journey into historical linguistics to uncover exactly how our languages mutate over time. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. First, tracking linguistic evolution. Then, the DEmA database. Third, 5 mechanisms of change. Fourth, a case study on Hindustani phonology. Fifth, the DNA of words. And finally, number 6, the unending evolution. Section 1, tracking linguistic evolution, tracing the invisible. Which brings us to our first real mystery. How do we actually track the evolution of language? It's a serious question because language change is entirely invisible as it happens. The people speaking the language rarely, if ever, even notice it. So historical linguistics is essentially a forensic science. Researchers have to take scattered, ancient, and honestly often very messy data and organize it into trackable, scientific parameters to figure out exactly how we got from point A to point B. Section 2, the DEmA database, the ultimate linguistic ledger. To investigate this, we turn to our primary piece of laboratory equipment. It's a revolutionary tool for linguists called the DEmA database. That stands for the Pavia Diachronic Emergence of Alignment database. It's this massive open access platform designed to track how grammatical alignment patterns come into being across languages worldwide. And to make sense of all the chaos, this database breaks down the emergence of new language patterns into 3 very specific domains. First, the initial stage, what did the language look like before the change? Second, the developmental mechanism, how exactly did the change happen? And third, the result, what are the effects of this change on the language as it's spoken today? Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how this incredible systematization takes abstract historical shifts and turns them into hard, searchable, real-world data. Just take a look at this entry for Mandarin Chinese. It meticulously logs the original alignment pattern, the source construction, and the specific mechanisms of change. This level of organization completely sets the stage for us to understand the specific, universal rules of linguistic mutation. Section 3, 5 mechanisms of change, the laws of linguistic mutation. Based on all that data, what are the literal laws of mutation that drive language forward globally? Well, the database proves that languages generally mutate in one of these 5 ways. You can think of these just like biological genetic mutations that alter a species over time. We have grammaticalization, where a normal word turns into a grammatical marker. We have the reinterpretation of argument structure, where a sentence's fundamental meaning gets flipped. We have extension, where a rule spreads to new parts of a language. We have phonological change, which is the physical shift of the sounds themselves. And finally, loss, where a sound or marker just completely drops out of existence. So the crucial point is how these mechanisms actually look in practice. Let's look at grammaticalization using a quick A/B test of the Chinese word ba. Now, in classical Chinese, ba was a lexical verb. It literally meant to take. But over time, through just sheer frequent use in sentences where an object was shared, it mutated. In modern Mandarin Chinese, it totally lost its literal meaning of take and transformed into an accusative object marker, a piece of grammar used to mark the direct object. A literal action mutated into a purely grammatical function. No way, right? That is a real game changer. Section 4. Case study, Hindustani phonology. Tracing the ancestry of a language. Now that we've seen the macro view of the global database, let's put a specific language family under the microscope to explore its deep roots from Old Indo-Aryan. And this brilliantly illustrates the long, slow process of phonological change we just talked about. Look at the word for potter. In ancient Sanskrit, it's a heavy, complex word, kumbhakaraha. But over millennia, as it moves through early and late Prakrit into Old Hindi, the structure literally decays and simplifies. Sounds are lost, vowels merge. By the time it reaches modern Hindustani, it has been streamlined all the way down to kumhar. The exact same thing happens with shamalakha, meaning dusky, which gracefully simplifies all the way down to samvla. You are literally looking at the fossil record of human speech. Section 5, the DNA of words, categorizing the vocabulary. Because Hindustani has such a rich, layered history of borrowing and evolving, grammarians have mapped this linguistic DNA into specific etymological classes, which creates a unique fingerprint for the modern vocabulary. The first category is called tadbhava, which roughly translates to arising from that. These are words that are the directly inherited genetic material of the language. They're the true evolutionary descendants of Sanskrit, having passed through all those messy, intermediate stages of vernacular Prakrits and Apabhramsha, experiencing all the natural sound changes along the way. To let you literally hear this evolution for yourself, just look at the ancient Sanskrit word for tongue, jihva. Through natural phonetic decay and simplification across centuries, it became jibha in Prakrit, and finally arrived at its modern tadbhava equivalent in Hindustani, jib. Now we contrast this with our next category, tatsama, which means same as that. These words entirely bypass the messy evolutionary decay we just saw. They were imported directly from Sanskrit into Hindi much, much later, with only very minor tweaks, like maybe dropping a final short vowel. For instance, the Sanskrit word rupa, meaning form, was borrowed directly into Hindustani simply as roop. It's essentially linguistic time travel, bringing an ancient word straight into the modern era intact. And then we have deshash, meaning indigenous. These are completely native words that have no traceable roots in Sanskrit whatsoever. They entered Hindustani from entirely different language families like Dravidian or Munda. A great example is the Hindustani word orna, meaning to cover up or veil. It actually traces back to the Dravidian family, super similar to the Tamil word utu, meaning to wear. It really shows how languages absorb the environment around them. Because languages aren't just isolated bubbles, right? This borrowing creates what linguists call doublets. Here we see two words for butter in Hindustani. You have makhan, which was actually borrowed from northwestern dialects like Punjabi, where they use heavy consonant clusters. But then you also have mekhan, the native naturally evolved tadbhava term, which honestly is mostly archaic now. But this proves that language doesn't evolve in a vacuum. It's a wonderfully messy, overlapping ecosystem of different dialects just pushing and pulling against each other. Section 6. The unending evolution, language in motion. Let's move to and see how this builds, tying our microscopic sound changes back to the macroscopic beauty of human communication. We've gone from microscopic sound changes and database entries all the way back to the big picture, and the core thesis of this explainer is perfectly summarized right here. The inherited native lexicon of any language, whether we're talking about Hindustani, Mandarin, or English, exhibits a massive amount of extensive sound change from its ancestors. So the words you are speaking right now, they are actually fossilized history. They have been constantly hammered and shaped by grammaticalization, loss, extension, and phonological shifts. Which leaves us with a truly fascinating question to ponder. Language evolution hasn't stopped, folks. It's happening right now, in your texts, in your daily conversations, and in the random slang we invent. So when future linguists fire up whatever database they're using centuries from now to track our conversations, what mutations will they find that we are unconsciously creating today? What perfectly normal word today will be an unrecognizable grammatical marker tomorrow? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and hey, keep listening closely to the words around you.